welcome to the Mindset Michele TV show. We're so super excited for you to be joining us for yet another incredible show. With today, we have the wonderful Debra Wylde. Hello, Debra.
Hello, Michele. Hello, everyone listening.
It's so wonderful to have you come onto the show today. And for those of you that aren't aware of who Debra is, as you can see, lovely, she's got it on her picture there. She's from Into Jobs. And she's a business navigator, and we'll hear a little bit later what that is. But she works with startups and existing micro businesses. I had to remind myself then what it was micro businesses in the business relationship, communications and branding space. And it all sounds really amazing and incredible and exciting. But before we go into what you currently do, Debra, I'm really interested in who you are. How did you come to be doing, what you're passionate about? What was your life's kind of journey to get to where you are now?
Oh, wow. Life's journey. How long do we have? Look, how I arrived here in my current role is basically a long time ago, I was a professional rock climber. Well, actually a rock climbing instructor. And we used to do leadership programs for big corporates, and that was me and the boys back then. And so one day we actually had a really big program where there were a lot more staff involved, and they were all men, and I was the only woman. So they kicked me off the houseboat that we normally stayed in and made it men's only. And much to my disgust, I ended up with the conference organizer, and her name was Tracy, and we were staying at the Anchorage in Port Stephens. Those of you who know, it's very nice. Not much to complain about whether you're on the houseboat or inside, but I wanted outside with the stars and dolphins. So anyway, Tracy and I, we got to know each other. We got along really well, and had a couple of wines, and she asked me a very profound question. And so this is all about mindset. And one of the most powerful things that you can do is generate powerful questions to point the mind in a particular direction. And she asked me if, rock climbing, instructing and experiential outdoor learning was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And I was in my mid-20s, and I'd never pondered that, the risks involved. It's hard on the body. And I said, no. And she asked me, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to do what I do with people, but in a suit like the other people who were staying inside the Anchorage. And so, short story, they followed me around and in the bush and invited me to intern for a couple of weeks under one of the pros. And I got ticked off. And I became a consultant, a business consultant, and I was mentored with that group of individuals. And then one of them stood out. Her name was Annie, and I said to her, I could just tell that her participants went away with deeper learning, deeper systemic behavioural change. I said, what are you doing? And she said, it's NLP.
So for people that don't know, that's neuro-linguistic programming?
Yeah. And so back then, I was lucky enough to, be paid a lot more from working inside, and I reinvested it into my NLP training and got to work with the best in the business. So Philippa Bond, Dr. Wyatt Woodsmall, Marvin Oka, like the gods of NLP, basically. And I never looked back. And so when I saw Philippa trained, I decided that I wanted to be her. She was my role model. And then I, since then, I became a master trainer with Wyatt. And with him, I worked all over the world. So I did my training in Copenhagen. I finished off the trainers in Copenhagen. And then I worked for 4 years in Istanbul, where I got my master trainers. And I worked with him in Bahrain, Saudi, London, so all over the world. And that's basically how I got to be where I am today.
Wow. I'm so amazed and fascinated, and thank you so much for describing that so beautifully. That's just incredible, you know, like from rock climbing to being in Copenhagen and all over the world. I'm sure when you were being asked that question, you know, well, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? Even to have imagined the exponential way that your life was going to shift and everything through doing that neuro-linguistic programming or NLP, it is just an incredible. Do you think, you know, this love or interest in people was something when you were growing up, it was always in your life?
Yeah, definitely. I remember there were three things that led me to where I am today. So you know, we had a working class background. You know, Dad was a bit of a bomb out, you know, not around. Mum packed his suitcase for him when we were 5. And we ended up living on a farm, and the lady who owned the farm was a nurse, but she was also a businesswoman. And so I got to see what it was like for a woman. I didn't think about the female aspect back then, but the fact is she was a woman and she was extremely successful, and she basically sponsored me for all of my equestrian riding, you know, from the time I was 5 all the way through to my late teens. She paid for everything, the horses, the saddles, the Louis Epstein riding gear, the Baxter boots, the whole thing, including chocolate cake on the weekends. So she was a role model. And then I fell in love with Mrs. Ludikins, who was my primary school teacher, and I decided I wanted to be a teacher in my own way. And the United Nations also inspired me. So working with people, wanting the world to be better, even though I was young, I understood that war wasn't great. I understood that, you know, in some way I wanted to make a difference as a 5 or 6 year old. I was always interested in National Geographic and documentaries, and 60 Minutes I think I watched religiously. So that's how it all married. So the business, the teaching or the training and the speaking, and people, you know, people of the globe, and wanting to make a difference.
Wow. And again, you know, I'm just loving so many different wonderful elements and influences. You know, I can just see the chocolate cake and the equestrian and also the teacher. You know, teachers have such a profound impact on people's interest in things and also belief in themselves. Coming up to today and who you are now, and it is different for at different times of life. But what would you say success now means to you?
That's a good question. Finally, I wrote about this the other day. Success to me, in a work context, means that my clients exceed their own expectations, so that I'm able to unlock something in them that they don't even know existed, and that they realize that they are actually, number one, capable, but they also realize that they're more than who they thought they ever were. And that for me is why I get up in the morning. So to do that constantly, consistently, and improving every day is something that I consider to be success. And then there's other things as well, like obviously the transfer of value between us and our clients, which is called pay, salary, hourly fees, outcome packages, whatever you want to name it. And also to be a good human, because in the past, like, you know, I had a lot of, you know, international success, and I used that international success for a little while as validation for my self-worth. And when I came back to Sydney without the promoters, I had to learn how to rebuild from the inside out, because I didn't have any of the stuff anymore. There was no one running around telling everyone how great I was. There was no one, you know, giving me like big wads of, you know, US dollars at the end of the week. There was no PR people. There was no TV. There was no front page on the newspaper. It was inside out. And so all of those props were taken from me when I returned to Sydney. There was no LinkedIn back then. My network had moved around. No one had the same phone number. So I really had to start from scratch, and I was humbled. You know, I was really humbled. I went from great heights to a bunker, and I had to learn how to rebuild. And so I rebuilt using spiritual principles. I couldn't get traction any other way, and I just had to put focus on the things that I could control, which was gratitude. I had to focus on the giving rather than the getting, and I was smart enough to understand that the energy was just not there for me to launch another business. And so I upskilled in digital marketing at Metro Screen in Paddington. For a year, I did an advanced diploma in storytelling. And from there, I was able to re-emerge with the digital skills as well as all of the change management and the performance development and so forth that NLP gave me, and everything that I've done in the past. So now I have a genuine marriage of all three, I guess. So I've got the mind, I've got the spirit, and I've got digital. And I've just enrolled for a big horse ride in January across the snowy mountains, and so that's the body.
I love that. I can see you horse riding across the snowy mountains and stopping for chocolate cake now. It's all of the different wonderful elements that you're describing, and I love your broad range of success. You know, everything from what you're doing with your clients and helping them to succeed, right the way through to how beautifully you shared around some elements of your life's journey. And it struck me, you know, like people that have early success early in their careers have a similar kind of thing about you get such great success and adulation, and then you kind of in that void afterwards, you have to then kind of start to rebuild. And I loved your insights into you know, that mind and spirit, and studying some more in the digital space. So seeing those four different areas now, the horses in the body, the spiritual and the digital and the mind. We've touched a little bit on some of the elements around, you know, being successful. And I think for people watching, you know, you are such a great example of somebody who's reached great heights and, you know, asked for lots of money in US dollars on an international global scene, and had success, you know, in equestrian riding or whatever it might be, and understood that, you know, and then the sun comes up the next day and it's you know, an everyday life. So I'm interested in then, what sorts of tips and suggestions do you have for people that might be looking for those great heights or looking for that everyday, you know, life sort of success? What suggestions do you have for them?
Find your North Star.
And what do you mean by that?
You need to point your life in a direction. So in NLP, we've talked about the reticular activating system, talked about where power comes from, the 8 sources of power. That, you know, we are the creators of our lives, and it's really important to have a direction to point your life towards in all areas. But so business, career, relationship, your spiritual well-being, your mental, recreation. That there's, you know, those categories that you can use. But if we stick to a business context, it's really important to dream. It's, you know, when I said that I wanted to be like Philippa, deep down I really wanted to be like Anthony Robbins. And you know, that pointed my life in a direction. And back then I didn't even know what was possible. I didn't know how much consultants could potentially earn. I didn't know how much speaking on stage could potentially earn. I certainly didn't know how much training trainers could potentially earn, or that I would end up working in Istanbul. But I pointed in a direction, and the direction was excellence in the training space, and specifically back then in the NLP space. And I succeeded, and all of the other things happened because that gave me a direction.
I love how beautifully and simply, you know, people talk about purpose or, you know, your why. And I love how you brought it back to that finding your North Star, and as simple as, and it must become from your rock climbing days, but, you know, pointing in a direction, you know. It doesn't necessarily matter what the direction is to start with, because it may change as you go on, but it's taking that initial step and pointing in a direction. And I loved when you were talking about, you started off dreaming about Philippa, but it was really about Anthony Robbins. When I started the TV show, I used to always make the comment about how when I wanted to grow up, I wanted to be Oprah, because, you know, Oprah's been so successful and this and that. And then I noticed some more of her style around things, and I went, well, actually, I'm not American, obviously, and I'm not into that sensationalism. And so I started looking more at Parkinson and people that were really, you know, when they interviewed people, they were actually much more about the connection and the depth between them and the person they were talking to, rather than, you know, can I get on the newspaper front page? And so, again, you know, my North Star, like most people that put themselves out there in some way, we all want to grow up and be Oprah. And then I think, it, you know, the North Star kind of moves around, and you kind of land. So, you know, Parkinson and people like that, that was some of the great, you know, interviewers of our time that had a way of talking to the janitor or the president of the United States, and that same lovely respect, deep and thoughtful questions that brought out the best in the people that they spoke to. So I think your point about find your North Star, or find the direction to go on the rock that you're climbing, is really important.
Yeah, I agree. So, you know, and once you've met a North Star, like, you know, I met mine for sure, you know, don't be afraid to recreate, to reinvent, and go for the next thing. It's like, if you feel like you've mastered that and you've had enough, then it's time to do the work to discover other things. You know, nothing's fixed. And recently on Netflix, there's a great series called Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he describes really well how he went through the stages. So the first North Star was to live in America, and the bodybuilding was a way to get there. Then he wanted to be Mr. Universe. He mastered those things. He did it all. And then he decided, he looked around and went, well, what's next? Because I don't want to do this anymore. And then after he did the what's next, he envisaged it, and he became the governor of California. So that series is a great example of someone envisioning their life, living the North Star.
And, you know, I'm not necessarily a big fan of the Kardashians or people in that sort of world, but one of the things I do really admire is that they have created a business around personal branding. And in that they're a great example as well of, you know, if you think way back, Kim Kardashian's thing was about the sex tape, to be noticed. So her North Star was, I want to be noticed. And then it was this, and then it was that, and then they had the TV series, and then they had the clothes, and then they had the et cetera, et cetera. So I think you're right, and it's a really good example, thank you, of, you know, once you reach one North Star, kind of repivoting, and Arnie's story of, you know, I want to go to the US, I want to be a Mr. Universe bodybuilder, I want to become governor of California. All of these things that when you're starting may look like saying, you know, I want to go and live in outer space or something like that, in terms of where you are now. But staying true to that North Star and staying true to what you're passionate about and what gets you out of bed in the morning means that you can take those steps. What do you think? You know, everybody has it, you know, challenges at times in life and difficulties, etc. What do you think are the key things that you do in terms of resetting your mind and focusing back on the success that you can create? What sort of things do you do to do that so that you can keep coming back to, I can create my new North Star, or I'm on track to my current North Star?
I think it's really important to calibrate. And, you know, as Socrates says, know thyself. So if you have big dreams, you need to make sure that your belief system's not in the way, that you're ready for it. So firstly, you've cleared up the beliefs. So yes, you're worthy. Yes, you can do it. Yes, you can receive it. Yes, you can experience it. Yes, you can live it, and you're worthy of those things. The second point is you need to be a master of your craft. There's no such thing as getting up in the morning and being half-baked. You know, Philippa used to say, don't practice on paying clients. And there's a lot of, you know, half-baked people there who might look really good on camera, got an idea or two or a few tips that they can share. But when it really comes to business development or business coaching, you know, it's the whole package. You can't, I say to people all the time, and I'm sure you do, it's like, I can't, no matter how good the strategy is that I'm about to give you, right? So we're going to do an Instagram strategy. We're going to hashtag for, you know, a promo competition, tag your friends, put a comment, blah, blah, right? No matter how good that is, if you do not have your stuff cleared out, we are not going anywhere, because you will sabotage. And where you are at your level of consciousness is the level that the business can elevate to, and that is all.
That's such an important point, because I describe it, or you talk about, you know, your energetic, what you're resonating on, and it starts with those elements that you were saying around your belief system, but it also comes to your level of consciousness. And for me, and the way I describe it to people, it's kind of like you consciously are aware of things like, you know, I believe I'm tall, short, fat, thin. You know, they're kind of the easy and the obvious ones. But the levels of consciousness can be everything sometimes, and it's quite deep stuff now, but everything from intergenerational. You know, we've always done it this way, that you got from your parents and your parents got from their parents. And a lot of this is actually unconscious, so you may not even understand that you're doing it. But that level of consciousness is true in the way we work with it. Observing how you're doing things, observing what you're saying, observing your feelings, all of that, because your unconscious will come through in that way, and it's only through the observation that you can then become self-aware about it and then shift it and change it. And I completely agree with you, because same, when we work with people and you can give them everything, step 1, 2, 3, and you can see them go towards step 1 and then they're off somewhere else completely because the self-sabotage kicks in, or this or that. And that level of consciousness about, well, I said I really wanted it, but I didn't really want it, and so I'm not going to be doing it, is, I hope that we're explaining it well enough for people that are listening, because it can mean that you can spend all the money in the world and have all the plans in the world, but if you don't kind of work through the, in fact, a funny little story about this, when I lived in Scotland with my grandmother for a little while, I was working and got home about 6, 7 o'clock at night and was cooking us all dinner. And she said to me one night, only rich people have dinner at 7 o'clock. And it was such a strange comment. But in their lifestyle, and she wasn't working obviously by then, but in their lifestyle, this was on the Clyde Bank in Scotland, they would be getting up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to go and work on the ships in the shipyard. So they would be having dinner about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and supper maybe about, and supper means tea and toast typically, supper about 7 o'clock at night. So when we were there having dinner, because I was in a modern office, was when they would be having their tea and toast. So it was a very big shift. But I was fascinated with this throwaway comment that reflected what she had got from her parents and so on, and passed and passed and passed. And it's a great example for me of that subconscious or unconscious level of consciousness that can be driving people without them necessarily knowing. Do you have a good example of one yourself that you realised?
Might not be able to pull it up quick enough. I've done it the last 2-3 years. Have really focused on cleaning it out. I recognised that there was a pattern of disappointment going on in my life, and you know, so the one thing that we need to understand is that the outside world is a reflection of ourselves. So anyone that we're having angst with and continually, there's a pattern there. So it's, you know, why is this person reflecting this back to me? What do I need to change in myself to change this dynamic? So in NLP, we used to say that your communication is the response that you get. And I like that, is because we take absolute responsibility for the way we communicate and the results that we get. So if we're aware enough that if we look at our life as an energetic pattern, that certain things aren't working in a particular way, and that there's a continuing pattern that we don't like. For example, partners treating us badly, or anybody treating you badly, or clients underpaying you, or there's a lot of argy-bargy with clients around money exchange, or not wanting to pay you what you're worth. There's a gap between what you're wanting and where you are, and we need to look at that. It's like, what is not in me, what is not embodied in me, to actually pull that towards me, as in, where is my vibration? So a good person to look at is a couple of things. So Dr. Bruce Lipton, The Biology of Belief, is a fantastic text for anyone to read. It's easy to understand, and it sort of leans towards epigenetics in terms of generational impact from belief systems, and how important it is for parents, especially, hi mum, hi dad, if you're coming from an energetic system of fear, okay, we're bringing up, I mean, look around us, like we're bringing up a generation, a global humanity that's filled with fear. And at the moment, we're passing that on generationally because we're not connected. Like we're not connected to our truth, which is source or soul, whatever you want to call it, where everything is abundant, where everything is well, where everything is okay, where we are led by our soul towards the next steps. There's no more thinking to do anymore, because you just follow that impulse and away it goes, and you trust it. And so the work of Dr. Hawkins is something that I invite you all to look at, and his emotional scale. So when I work with business people, my current role into jobs, and outside, you know, if anyone wants some help, it's, you know, if we're vibrating, if you say you're going through something messy like a divorce or a relationship breakup, normally there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of base emotions going on there. That's a really tricky place to start and run a business from. So the sooner we're able to clean that up and move through the anger into understanding how our part in it, how that won't happen again, and how it was a big gift, then that allows us to move up the emotional scale. And so, you know, often people say, you know, I forgive. And Dr. John DeMartini says, in order to know that you've truly forgiven, there must be a tear of gratitude, as in a visceral response from the body that you're really grateful for that episode that you've just transcended. So an example from my own life would be...
So just before we kind of go on, because we're coming towards the end of the show, and I hate to do this to people, but I think that's a really wonderful point where if people do want to hear the example from Debra's life, what's the best way for people to get hold of you, Debra?
LinkedIn. Just go to Debra Wylde and you can DM.
Oh, wonderful. And if you were to give your younger self some advice, what might that advice be?
Circumstances that you grow up in do not determine your future.
I do wish that we could keep talking, because there's so many beautiful stories and so many more insights that I think would just be absolutely amazing to hear from such a wealth, such a deep pool of experience and knowledge that I know that you have. But Debra, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Michelle. And, I wish you all the best, and everyone that's been, listening. I hope something landed. And, my wish for all of you is a big, bright, happy, joyous life.
And what a beautiful gift. Thank you for that wonderful, wonderful gift, the wish for a bright, beautiful, joyous life. And to everybody watching, from me, the same wish, and thank you and gratitude again for tuning in and for all of the wonderful, fabulous feedback that we keep getting about how much you're loving the show. And for now, from my heart to your heart, be great, be fabulous, and be you.